الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الخلق سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه والتابعين. أما بعد، رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. Dear respected people, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome back to another episode of An Ayah a Day Shows You the Way. Today, inshallah, we'll be exploring the 16th juz of the Quran, the 16th chapter of the Quran, more specifically Surah Kahf. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم آتوني زبر الحديد حتى إذا ساوى بين الصدفين قال انفخوا حتى إذا جعله نارا قال آتوني أفرغ عليه قطرا فما استطاعوا أن يظهروه وما استطاعوا له نقبا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in translation of this ayah, of these two ayahs, and bring me lumps or blocks of iron. And when he filled that which was in between the two mountains, he said, blow, until he made it like a fire, until he made it like red. Then he said, bring me molten copper so I can pour it on top of it, i.e. the iron. فَمَا اسْطَاعُوا أَن يَظْهَرُوهُ وَمَا اسْتَطَاعُوا لَهُ نَقَبًا. And they weren't able to penetrate that, i.e. the dam that was built, and they weren't able to scale it either. This ayah is referring to when Dhul Qarnayn, he built the dam or the wall so that Ya'juj and Ma'juj do not penetrate it and cause corruption on the earth. Before I explain this ayah, this incident, I want to give a backdrop about Dhul Qarnayn, because obviously this is who it's referring to. Dhul Qarnayn was somebody we mentioned in episode number 3. In episode number 3, when we spoke about Namrud and Ibrahim alayhi salam challenging him, we said that there were 4 kings in history who ruled the entire east and the west. The 2 disbelieving kings were Namrud and Bukhtu Nasr, and the 2 believing kings who believed in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and submit to Allah Azza wa Jal. The first one was our Nabi Sulaiman alayhi salam, and the second one is Dhul Qarnayn, who we're mentioning here today. Now, Dhul Qarnayn, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us brief details about him. There's no extensive details about Dhul Qarnayn. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes mention of him in the later part of Surah Kahf. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِنَّا مَكَّنَّا لَهُ فِي الْأَرْضِ وَآتَيْنَاهُ مِنْ كُلِّ شَيْءٍ سَبَبًا. We implanted him in the earth. We gave him dominion. We gave him sheer authority. وَآتَيْنَاهُ مِنْ كُلِّ شَيْءٍ سَبَبًا. And we gave him a means of everything. And what this basically means is, he was given power, he was given might, he was given the ability to overthrow oppressive rulers and kings, he was given the ability to create justice in the earth, he was given military might, such that he could dominate the world with goodness. And from some of the ayah that I mentioned here, he was somebody who used to go on a lot of expeditions, a lot of missions. You know, when you read Surah Kahf every Friday and you come across this section, you will read this ayah, فَأَتْبَعَ سَبَبًا ثُمَّ أَتْبَعَ سَبَبًا ثُمَّ أَتْبَعَ سَبَبًا, which basically means he pursued a way, he pursued a mission, he went out on an expedition, he was active, he was always doing things. And here it says that he came across people in the west, he came across people in the east, i.e. where the sun used to set and where the sun used to rise. So what does this basically mean? Dhul Qarnayn was a man who was active in pursuing the affairs of his people, because he was given dominion over the east and the west. And he even says here that he came across a people where the sun sets, and they said to him, إِمَّا أَن تُعَذِّبَ وَإِمَّا أَن تَتَّخِذَ فِيهِمْ حُسْنًا. And we said to Dhul Qarnayn that you can either punish them or you could do unto them some good. And Dhul Qarnayn reply was, As for those, قَالَ أَمَّا مَنْ ظَلَمَ فَسَوْفَ نُعَذِّبُهُ. As for those who do oppression, we will punish him. ثُمَّ يُرَدُّ إِلَىٰ رَبِّهِ فَيُعَذِّبُهُ عَذَابًا نُكْرًا. Then after we punish him, he will be returned to his Lord, while Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will inflict on them a severe punishment. وَأَمَّا مَنْ آمَنَ وَعَمِلَ صَالِحًا فَلَهُ جَزَاءً الْحُسْنَى. As for those who believed and do righteous deeds, then for them is a reward. وَسَنَقُولُ لَهُ مِنْ أَمْرِنَا يُسْرًا. And we will say to him from our matter that which is easy. We'll give him easy words. So he was going east to west, meeting different people, fulfilling their needs. Now there comes, subhanAllah, a point here, a minor detail I forgot to mention. What does Dhul Qarnayn actually mean? Dhul Qarnayn means the owner of the two horns. And there's so many kind of reports around why he was called Dhul Qarnayn. Some people said that the way he kind of styled or had his hair was that he had kind of two kind of braids here on his hair. Other people say, and this is kind of what the majority inclined towards, that he was called Dhul Qarnayn because he controlled the eastern and western hemisphere, and they kind of look like horns. So that's why it's called Dhul Qarnayn. But now back to this point here, he now comes across another people on his journey from his missions and expeditions, that he basically comes across people and they say to him that there's a nation called Ya'juj and Ma'juj, mufsiduna fil ard. They're causing crazy amounts of corruption on the earth. فَهَلْ نَجْعَلُ لَكَ خَرْجًا عَلَىٰ أَن تَجْعَلْ بَيْنَنَا وَبَيْنَهُمْ سَدًّا. Can we kind of pay tribute to you? Can we give you like a little bit of money? Can we kind of give you something so that you can create between us and them a wall or a dam? Then Dhul Qarnayn turns around and he says, look, what Allah has bestowed upon me of all these blessings and goodnesses is better than what you can give me. But فَأَعِينُونِي بِقُوَّةٍ. Assist me in labor. That's all he asked for them. Assist me in labor. And he will create between, he says, I will create between you and them a dam or a wall or a barrier. Now this is where it comes to the ayah. آتوني زبر الحديد. He asks for lumps of iron. He puts them in between, the two mountains, the two passes, and he blows on the iron, and then he asks for molten copper to come and pours the copper on them. And then the end of the story, it goes that, the Ya'juj and Ma'juj, they weren't able to scale or penetrate that wall. They weren't able to damage it. What is the detail I want to focus on specifically now, other than the fact that Dhul Qarnayn was someone who showed the true attributes of a leader, that when you're in charge of East and the West, he wasn't stopping. One day was East, one day was West, going on this expedition, going on this mission to check on the affairs of his people, because he knew he was answerable to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now in this specific example, Dhul Qarnayn exhibits and teaches a lesson, such a beautiful lesson to all leaders, a beautiful lesson. I want to focus on the part where he says, give me molten copper so I can pour it on the iron. When you look at the elements and material of copper, and once it's dried, copper, you find, is a very slippery material. So if you were to light, there's a radiator behind me. If you were to kind of scratch below on the copper bar or the pipe that's there, it's very smooth. It's very, very smooth. Yeah? You won't be able to kind of catch any friction on there. It's very smooth. And we also know that Ya'juj and Ma'juj, they were people who later on in narration say that, they will try and scratch it, etc. But how, subhanAllah, can you scratch when there's no friction against anything? What are you going to catch onto? You're not going to catch onto anything. Here, Dhul Qarnayn is illustrating that when you are in charge of a people, you look after their affairs to the best of your ability, in willpower, in labor, even to the minute details of materials being used to create a wall. Subhanallah. Because had he used another material, they may have perhaps been able to penetrate it. But subhanAllah, Allah is saying that this detail of pouring the molten copper, and then when the copper settles, you can't penetrate because it's a slippery material. In other words, look at the thinking Dhul Qarnayn applied when it came to looking after his people. He said, I am going to build a wall so strong and so intelligently that they will not be able to scale it and they won't be able to destroy or penetrate this wall. Now, I want to contrast this example of Dhul Qarnayn to the world today, and then explain why is there a stark difference between the likes of Dhul Qarnayn, the likes of Sulaiman alayhi salam, the likes of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, the likes of Umar radiallahu anh, the likes of Sultan Abdul Hamid As-Sani the second. Why are the differences between these set of people and the leaders we have today? What is the stark difference? The difference is one person has assumed a position of responsibility based upon the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. i.e., they've assumed it as a true responsibility. They know that when I take this position, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has entrusted me with this position, and therefore I am in charge of these people. I must give them their rights. I must ensure that their affairs are taken care of. I must ensure that there's a sense of well-being amongst them. I must ensure that there's prosperity in the society I'm dominating or ruling over them by. So this is the Islamic view. This is how people who believed in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala viewed the idea of responsibility and leadership. As for today, the moment you extract, dear brothers and sisters, the idea of accountability from leadership and responsibility, it becomes a lucrative career. You make money, loads of money. In fact, on the Forbes website, when I was looking into some research of this, when Mubarak reigned over Egypt for 32 years, the full website said, and Allahu A'lam, but he said that he amassed $700 billion. $700 billion, where the people of Egypt today, the average cost of living or the average kind of amount of survival is like 40 cents a day. 40, it's not even $1 a day. 45, that's like 20p almost, subhanallah. But why does that happen? Why does that happen? It happens because somebody has assumed the position of leadership based upon a criteria other than La ilaha illallah. And this is why, my dear brothers and sisters, we have crises over crises in the world we live in today. Because people do not link their position and accountability to the questioning of Allah Azza wa Jalla on Qiyamah. It's simple. It's not complicated. It's not rocket science. It's not further maths. It's simple. And we learn, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts this example here, that when we look at our countries like Pakistan, they're always going through floods. Flood after flood after flood. Yes, they're natural disasters from Allah Azza wa Jalla. Allah Azza wa Jalla sends tests. But then the people have a responsibility to ensure that these tests are maintained and controlled because Allah has given them the resources to do this. So why aren't dams built properly in Pakistan? It's because the leaders in Pakistan are there to make money. Very, very honestly. You look at Egypt, the same thing. Why is it that some residential buildings, wallahi, I've seen it with my own eyes because I lived there for 5 years. Some buildings are actually built kind of sideways. They're not balanced. They're not grounded. They're kind of leaning towards the left or the right. Now imagine an earthquake or something happens, that building will just collapse straight away. In Morocco, when there was an earthquake recently in Morocco, subhanAllah, other than the rich, affluent areas and complexes that are being developed, where the normal poor people live, the infrastructure hasn't been touched in years. So what's the general principle I'm making here? That when leaders do not link their position of responsibility to Allah Azza wa Jalla's question on Qiyamah, then we're going to have very, very, very bad, treacherous leaders, because all they care about is making a lot of money. But then, when you have someone, Dhul Qarnayn, by the way, I'm not talking about, Nawaz Sharif or Sisi or these small timers. Why do I call them small timers? Because they didn't control the whole East and the West. Dhul Qarnayn had so much power. Allah says, وَآتَيْنَاهُ مِنْ كُلِّ شَيْءٍ سَبَبًا. We've given him everything. And on top of that power and might, how did he use it? He used it for the betterment of the people, because he knew that his authority over people was a responsibility. So I pray, inshallah, you all found benefit in this episode. All good was from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All bad and shortcomings are from myself. And bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, I'll see you tomorrow for another episode. Until then, barakallahu feekum. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.